right, here he is, Kyle Thomas from Exhorder. Kyle, what's going on, my man?
Well, Logan, how about yourself?
Good, man. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
So you got a brand new album, Defectum Omnium, which is out now. It's been out for a while now, I think about 3 weeks, the day that we're recording this. And what's wild to me is that at this point, the band is nearly 40 years old, and this is only the band's fourth record. Granted, there's been a couple of, very long hiatuses, especially the first one, which is, almost 15 years or so.
Okay.
But still, almost 4 decades in, only 4 records. It's crazy. It's almost unheard of in a way.
Yeah, I guess maybe in the 30s we'll do another one.
Do you think we'll have to? I know this new one just came out, but do you think we'll have to wait another? What's it been? 5, 6, 7 years or so since the last one?
More in the Southern Skies came out in the autumn of 2019, so it's 4.5 years. Yeah.
Wow. How long until you think that?
Which, by our standards, isn't that long?
Well, no, that's pretty quick. That's a pretty quick turnaround, honestly.
Yeah.
You also have an upcoming. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, obviously we're going to support this album because we don't have a pandemic to deal with,
Sure.
so we can actually get out and support it. But yeah, we're absolutely intent on rolling like clockwork, the way it should be done.
Yeah.
From here.
Well, there's also an upcoming run with Vio-lence that starts in just a few weeks, mostly on the East Coast, which will be interesting, as I believe these will be the first ever, the first Vio-lence dates without Phil Demmel. Is obviously now he's a part of Kerry King's new band. So I think this will be like the first Vio-lence shows without him.
Yeah, we did the run with them in Latin America, which was Phil's last run before he, got busy with the Kerry King thing permanently. And it was a great time. We had a wonderful tour. We've gotten to be good friends with those guys, and we work well together. So this should be easy peasy. I'm not familiar with who is playing guitar on this upcoming run, but I'm sure he'll be quite capable, and they'll be in good hands knowing them.
If I recall, I was reading somewhere with you that Latin America tour that you're talking about. That was your first time going down there, right?
Yeah. I had never been in any of the bands that I've played with over the years. So the best part about that for Exhorder is that dating back to the late 80s, when we first started getting into, appearances in fanzines and in the tape trading world, people started doing, sending fan mail to us via snail mail, the, USPS. And a lot of the mail back then came from South and Central America, Argentina, Brazil, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Nicaragua, a lot of those countries. We always had a strong fan base, and they turned out for these shows, man. It was, Tuesday night playing wherever, and we've got a packed full room, which is not an easy thing to do in the US, that's for sure. But they definitely came out. They were wild and they were young. A lot of them were kids by my standards, and they were friendly and sweet, and everything that you could have hoped that would have happened.
Why do you think it took you so long to get down there?
It is a bit of an ordeal to do a tour there. If you're not from there, I'd imagine if you are from there, it's an ordeal, because if you look at a map, South America versus North America, just size-wise, it's tremendous. And we left the U.S. on the 30th of January, and we returned on, was it the 12th? I want to say it was the 12th. And in between that period of time, the 2-week period just about, there were only 2 days that we didn't spend in the airport. So
wow.
you got to fly in and out of just about everywhere. And
Sure.
some days we had like upwards of 3 flights. So it was grueling, man. I just turned 54 last week, so that it's not easy to travel like that uh, and do it on a daily basis. So when the off days came, we were definitely happy to have them. It was just a bunch of tired old men. I think only Adrian that plays drums for Vio-lence is not an old man in this on that tour.
Well, I've also heard that when you're down there, you got to really know what you're doing, because I mean it can be really dangerous with the cartel and all that kind of stuff down there too. So you got to really you got to have proper planning and a handler that really knows what they're doing.
We were fortunate. The promoter that we had actually went with us as a tour manager, and his partner. They halfway through the tour they switched out, so they were spectacular. They took very good care of making sure that we were ready to get on our jet. All of the gear was taken care of, that we were well fed, and that we had comfortable accommodations, and that nobody was in any kind of peril or anything at all. Really, it was one of the most well-run tours that I've been a part of.
So this new album, Defectum Omnium, this is also your the first Exhorder record with guitarist Pat O'Brien, formerly, of course, of Cannibal Corpse. And the way I understand it, that really that whole thing kind of came together from your bassist Jason, right? He's the one that kind of got the ball rolling for Pat to end up joining the band.
Yeah, Pat and Jason and Steve Tucker from Morbid Angel, they're all from the greater Cincinnati area. They all kind of grew up together as kids and teenagers. So I knew Pat not like super well, but casually over the years, just playing shows and festivals and this and that. And I knew a lot of the Cannibal Corpse guys from way back. Rob Barrett, I've known since the 90s when he was in Malevolent Creation, and we did some dates together back then. So there's always been a pleasant connection. But when the opportunity came for me to start playing guitar, and it was just me and Jason and Sasha, and clearly I'm a capable rhythm player and a capable enough lead player, but I'm not like a super lead player. And this band requires, someone who can come in and really play a lot of lead. So Jason said, "Man, what do y'all think about asking Pat?" And I said, "Dude, I'm absolutely for it. I love him as a person, and he's clearly qualified for the gig. So, yeah, see if he's interested." So he called Pat, and I think Pat was still kind of probably down in the dumps a little bit about how things had turned out from the previous few years. And Jason asked him, "Man, you want to come jam?" And he's like, "Man, you don't want to mess with me. I got all this bullshit going on." And Jason's like, "Do you want to just come to my house and jam in the garage with your friends?" And Pat perked up, was like, "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea." So Pat came, and it was kind of like we fed the stray cat, and he never left. It was great.
Well, obviously, like you mentioned, he did go through some stuff a few years back with assault and all that. But was there any hesitancy on your part to bring him in? Maybe a fear of, I don't know if backlash is the right word, but but maybe some fans or even the industry in general might be like, "Yeah, what are you guys thinking?" Or even just like general anxiety on your end just about bringing him into the fold, given his history?
The good news about this band is it's kind of been built on the premise of not really caring what anybody thinks.
Sure.
So we liked Pat, and we love his playing. And I would say that there were people in the industry that did say, that may not be such a great idea. And really, our concern wasn't with him or in any kind of personal aspect. Our concern has always just been, what are the the hardships that we're going to endure with traveling, because that
Sure, of course.
when someone's a felon, it changes things with how the entering certain countries can be. Some countries are more strict about it than others. So, long story short, is we just said let's just do this and see what happens. Nothing has to be permanent just yet. Let's just get a guy who's ready to start playing again on stage, and it'll help us out to have a guy of his caliber on stage with us, and maybe help him get his feet back, to sea legs again. And it just worked out so nicely that first year that we just said, you know what, we're lucky to have a guy like Valdemar Sarikta be able to cover us in Europe and on the South American run, when we're not sure about whether or not Pat can get in and out of places. But we're looking into all of the do's and don'ts and the hows and how nots with Pat finally being able to start going overseas again. He's ready. He wants so badly. I know he's chomping at the bit because he cares deeply about the people who care for him in the music world, and they want to see him play live. So as soon as we can rip off that Band-Aid and start taking a chance on him coming out on tour with us overseas, we're going to do it. In the meantime, we're loading up as much as we can in the U.S. so that he can get out there and play with us, because we feel like we're at our best when Pat's on stage with us.
Well, and to that point, obviously, Exhorder is a legendary band, even though, very, very underground, but really a legacy act at this point in a way. But does having a guy like Pat in the band help when, he's obviously a well-known guitar player. His name certainly holds a little bit of weight given his the past bands that he's been in. So does having a guy like Pat in the band help to sort of raise even more awareness of the band, maybe even help sell more tickets out on the
Sure.
road and things like that?
Yeah. And I do read the comments, and a lot of the times people are thanking us for giving Pat another opportunity. I mean, we're just as grateful that he's helping us as we are helping him. But there's a lot of people out there that are saying, I didn't even really know much about this band. And because of Pat's presence, I'm listening, and, that's gotten us some new fans for sure. And I have to say, from my personal perspective and observation, that on his own, Pat is easily as famous or even maybe more famous than Exhorder. So he elevates us in a lot of ways, especially with just awareness, like people knowing who we are that maybe didn't necessarily know who we were before. I mean, we did fine on our own, and this band, even before he joined, this band's more famous than it's ever been, but his presence definitely takes that to a new level, and we're grateful for that.
Well, there's certainly been a number of different people in the band over the years, but does this current lineup of Pat, Jason, Sasha, and yourself, does this feel like this could be potentially the permanent Exhorder lineup? I mean, Jason and Sasha have been in the band, I guess, since his second reunion in 2017, I believe, and then Pat came in 2022. So everybody's been here for at least a little while.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, with all the breakups that we've had over the years and the period of time in between that we were actually together, Sasha and Jason have been in this band for a longer period of time without the band breaking up than anybody else. So,
sure.
It is kind of something to chuckle at, but it's the truth. And then, Pat's been with us since 2022. So, yeah, Pat's been with us for 2 years now, and never has this band been this at peace and this, I guess, cohesive to the point where there's not, if there's difficulties and speed bumps to cross at any given moment in this band, we all work really well together to sort through it and not let it be a detriment to our environment. And that's not an easy thing to do, especially now, like post pandemic. We used to ride in the bandwagon, which is kind of like a poor man's tour bus. If you're not familiar with bandwagon,
Yeah, for sure.
bandwagon's a flatbed truck with basically a tour bus type uh, shell on it, and it has all the amenities of a tour bus, just not quite as fancy. Well, we used to be able to afford that. Right now, like with the prices of everything going up after the pandemic, uh, and what the promoters and venues are paying out to the bands not having changed much since the pandemic, it makes it a lot more difficult to have luxuries like that. So we're back to doing it van style,
Oh, wow.
and yeah, I talked around to a lot of people. Uh, my buddy Jimmy, that plays in I Hate God, they tour in vans. They've been doing it for years. The Melvins do it. It's like, well, if these bands can do van tours, surely we can. So Jason bought a van, and we're pulling a trailer, doing it van style, and it's pleasant. It's not like, late at night. It can be a little tough when you're trying to get comfortable, but we're getting hotels and sleeping comfortably, and making things work. And we're more importantly, we're having fun doing the shows. So uh, everyone gets along, and you can't put a price tag on that.
There's something about that, the entire scene of bands that you just mentioned, like you guys and I Hate God and things like that, where nobody's like divas, even though these bands are legendary, been around for decades. It's like, fuck it, we'll get in the van and hit the road, and it's all good. It's not, we need this and we need that. So it is really remarkable how different that scene is compared to other worlds with bands, even in similar size bands, but in other type more mainstream type of music, I guess you could say, where they're a little more diva-ish, So it really is remarkable.
Um, you definitely know what you're missing when you have toured on tour buses, which
Sure.
all of us have done, and it's a comfortable lifestyle. But the majority of us come from a punk rock background where it's all DIY. So I mean, it's hard sometimes. Like I said, I just turned 54, and it's not always easy on my battered body, but uh, you find a way to make it work, and the payoff is playing great shows, meeting people, and having people tell you, I've been waiting my whole life for this. And that was a life altering experience. It was more than just a concert, it was an experience. So when that happens, it makes it all worthwhile. That's for sure. There's no two ways about that.
I want to talk about what's arguably your most known record and something that's really revered as a metal classic, which is, of course, your debut album, Slaughter in the Vatican, which, like I said, is a well-known and much-loved record. But after I was reading some interviews with you, and you are like surprisingly hard on that record and the second one, The Law, which I want to get to. But by saying that you're not really completely thrilled with how the final product turned out to be. Why is that? Just out of curiosity.
We recorded the Slaughter in the Vatican demo back in 87, 88. And when we did it, that was our first time going into a real studio. And that was our intention when we started recording that demo. Was it wasn't going to be a demo. It was going to be our album, our debut album. And I can't remember if it was the drum tones or something. There was something that that the record label didn't like. And so they said, just start over and do it again. And we were like, why? And they said, it's just better than trying to doctor this thing up. Well, that plan backfired immensely because when we started recording it, we recorded the songs at too fast of a tempo for starters. I'm not sure why it happened that way, but we all allowed it to happen. So there's, not really a finger that can be pointed there. I guess maybe we had just been playing most of those songs for so long. A lot of those songs were written in 85, 86. So, you fast forward, that album came out in 90. So those songs were not new. And maybe we just kind of went through the motions with them at that point, and didn't really. We were inexperienced too. I was 19 when we recorded that album, and I really didn't have a lot of studio experience myself, and really there wasn't any of us that had much more than what anyone else had at the time. So then we realized that, you know, none of the tones, the drum tones, bass, guitars, none of it was really as good as the demo was. So then the label was like, well, just re-record the guitars and the bass, and then now we're going to have to re-record the drums. Yeah, let's go ahead and re-record the vocals too. So basically, we started that session, and everything was re-recorded. The only thing that exists from the original session was the tempos, and the tempos were wrong. So now, luckily, we had a guy of Scott Burns' caliber to take it and make the best of a bad situation. And sonically, the album's good. You know, maybe not what we intended it to sound like originally, but when you're on a $5,000 budget that's already over budget, and the technology was such that digital was not an option, it was all analog. So the album is what it is, and I don't try to badmouth it, because I know there are people out there that hail it as a classic, and I'm of the opinion that when an album is released, it no longer belongs to just me and the band. It belongs to everybody. So if the masses love it, then it must be a classic.
Does it kind of surprise you that it's taken on that life, though? I mean, given all the issues that there were when making it, and now it is looked at as a classic, is it almost baffling to you in a way?
Not really, because the songs are good. You know, that there's a lot of things over the years that I've learned about songwriting that are very different from what we did back then. But we came out doing something. Now, you know, I'm not going to say that we were the first ones to do any of this stuff, but we were definitely doing it our way, and throwing a flavor in it. Being from Louisiana and New Orleans in particular, that there was a flavor in what we did that was very different from West Coast thrash and New York hardcore and all that stuff. And we started on the punk rock scene. So, you know, a lot of people tend to forget just how rooted in punk this band was in the beginning. We did not start on the punk rock scene, in the heavy metal scene. We started on the punk rock scene. I think a lot of those things, our attitude, had a great impact on what set us apart from everybody else, I guess.
Well, and it was also a little bit of a similar situation with your second album, The Law, which, if I understand correctly, by the time you guys went in to record it, the band wasn't even finished writing the album. Is that right?
That is correct. We were still writing in the studio, and that's always a very dangerous situation, especially when you're not a band with a giant budget. You know, when you're Metallica and you can spend a year and a half in the studio trying this and trying that, and there's resources for it, sure, right in the studio. But that one crept up on us. We had perfected the songs on Slaughter in the Vatican over the years, and crafted those songs and trimmed away the fat and made them as great as they could possibly be over a 5-year span. And then we were doing our best to support the album. You know, we didn't have a lot of great tour options, or we had to turn them down because this guy couldn't do it because of this reason. Life gets in the way, right? But I don't know. We just woke up one day and Roadrunner was like, "All right, it's time to get in the studio for your next album." And we were like, "Oh!" So we had a few songs written, and some older ones that were still good enough to use that never made it on the Slaughter in the Vatican, and that's why you've got the Black Sabbath cover on there, because we used to play it live and we just needed more material. So I was like, well, screw it, just put it on the album, which I'm not unhappy about, but at the end of the day, I would have preferred to have one of our songs on there, you know?
Sure. Well, it was just a couple of years after the law was released that the band ended up on the first and the really lengthy hiatus. What was it that led to you guys deciding to call it quits back then?
Well, this band never was good at existing for long periods of time without inner conflict, and that's just the truth. So I want to say around 91, 92, there was a lot of frustration. Thrash was kind of on its way out, and death metal was getting big. And it wasn't like it is today, where you can put thrash bands and death metal bands together, even have like a symphonic metal band or a punk band, and they can go out on tour, and people are accepting of all these different genres being part of a package.
Sure.
Back in the day, it wasn't so. It wasn't the case. So we were a thrash, hardcore punk inspired thrash band, I guess is the best way to put what we were. Out on the road, playing festivals and touring with bands that were, either in the same boat as us or leaning more towards death metal. And I just don't know that the audiences were ready to embrace different genres. So I think some of the audiences were polarized, and some people didn't know what to do with us, and it was frustrating to us. And then, people started either being in college, having a job, having kids, and, or just flat out being frustrated with everybody fighting all the time. So I had lost some interest, and that's, I want to say around 92, 93, there was only 2 or 3 of us left that were actually trying to keep this thing going. And Jason Vibrooks came into the picture. So we were trying to work with him as far back as 93. And it just really didn't manifest into anything substantial. And at that point, I was done. So I left, and with my brother, we formed what became Floodgate, which is a lot more like bluesy, heavy metal rock kind of thing,
Sure,
rather than thrash and hardcore, which was what I grew up on anyway. So, a lot of people were like, "Oh, he really changed." It's like, not really. Like, the departure from me was learning thrash and hardcore, not this. This was like that was what I cut my teeth on. And I'm a musician. I took 5 years of trumpet when I was a kid. So I grew up listening to rock, metal, funk, new wave, all kind of stuff. So to me, like, it's just music. It's just whatever you're feeling like at the time. So anyway, long story short, don't mean to branch too much there. We split up, did a couple of reunion shows around 99, 2000-ish. And that was not like a reunion. It was just, get together, play a couple of shows and have fun and maybe make a little cash. Then we did the same thing again in 2009 through 2011. That fell apart again because this band doesn't exist very well, much more than a couple of years before there's inner conflict, and reform again in 2017. And there's been an evolution there as well. And here we are. But this is the longest, I think, that the band has ever been in existence without a breakup. So you're talking about 2017, and now you're talking about 7 years. That's the band formed, and the longest run before that was, we formed in 85, broke up in 88. So that's 2.5-ish years, because it was really, I didn't join the band. I was the last one to join in 86. So 2 years, break up, get together later that year, break up again from 88 to 93. So that's 5 years. Yeah, this is the longest this band's ever existed without having a breakup.
Well, I wanted to ask about that, the second, or the reunion from 08, 09 or whatever to 2011. Was the bass player at the time, Frankie Sparcello, I think is how you say the name. I'm not 100% sure, but is that how you say it, Sparcello?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Sparcello.
Yeah, so he, of course, tragically passed away in 2011. Is that how the band
Yes.
ended up on that second hiatus? I mean, had that not happened, would the band have continued on, or no?
No, it definitely was unexpected and was tragic. And I love and miss Frankie dearly. But we had shows booked like the following month. And we were fortunate that our friend Jorge Caicedo from New Orleans stepped up and learned the songs very quickly on bass and helped us as a fill-in for those dates. And it wasn't too long after that Jason Vibrooks came back into the picture, and he started working with us again that last year. So we did a handful of shows with Jason before it imploded again. And Jason was actually the one that facilitated us getting back together in 2017. He's the one that masterminded it.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, that's true.
So when back in 2020, I guess, when the band and Vinny parted ways, was there ever any consideration on your end to walk away from the band again? Like maybe you'd reached the point of like, now with Vinny's not in the band, I'm kind of the last man standing, so to speak, from the classic era of the band. Maybe I'll just do something else. Or were you always, even when it happened, like full speed ahead, I'm just going to carry on with Exhorder, blah, 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 and we're just going to keep on trucking?
Quitting this last time was never an option for me. I gave up a very comfortable lifestyle to get back into this and give it another chance. And a lot of security I had in a career that I had spent 20 something years in on and off. So we just looked at each other. We had we had a tour with Overkill that was starting in like a week or two. And we just looked at each other and said, let's power through, fulfill this obligation, and see what happens. And everybody was like, yeah, let's just keep going. So we did, and there have been a couple of tweaks here and there since, but the growth that this band has had since the pandemic, era, we did that tour and we had a great response. And then, unfortunately, lockdown happened. So we said, let's just start working on a new album. And that's what we did. And then a lot of the shows that we were supposed to play in 2020 that got pushed back because of the pandemic got pushed back to either 21 or 22. So we honored those, the ones that didn't cancel. We honored those and kept getting more invitations to get on tours. And the growth was happening. Our socials were growing. And the label was like, well, let's hear what y'all got demo wise. So we sent them demos of the new material and they loved it. So that's how we got to where we are at this moment. And it just keeps growing. And I'm not going to question it, because as soon as you start questioning it, you start getting inside your own head. But we're grateful, because it doesn't always work that way for a band, especially, this band grows whether we work it or not. And that's a rarity. It's not usually the case. So when we do work it grows exponentially. So here we are. We're going on tour with Vio-lence, then we're going to play some big festivals in Europe, a co-headline tour with Nervosa, and then we've got some stuff brewing for later on in the year that's looking really good. So we just keep chopping wood,
Out of curiosity, if you can answer, what was your career outside of music?
When I was back in the Floodgate days, Steve Fisher, that played guitar there, he worked for a company doing low voltage cabling installations for voice data video. And he's like, man, we need temp workers. You want to come work with us when we're not out playing shows? And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And so I did pretty well with the work and enjoyed it and enjoyed the company. And so between that and fire alarm, burglar alarm, access control, closed circuit television systems, and basically anything that's not high voltage that has a wire in it, I did it over a 22, 23 year period. And when when I got married and started having kids, Plan A and Plan B, which Plan A was music, Plan B was the wiring gig. They kind of traded places. So I'd still do band stuff here and there, but I was a full-time dad at that point. So I'm like, I can't go out and tour. I tried it once when I was in Alabama Thunder Pussy for about a year and a half period. And my kids were still very little. It was very hard on them. It was hard on me. And I said, I've got to stop this until they're old enough. And then when they were old enough, they looked at me and said, go get it, Dad. You got another chance at it, you know? And I was grateful for that. My family's always been very supportive of this, and they know the sacrifice that I made. If I had stayed true to my career, I probably would be living a much more comfortable life and a lot more well known. But you know, it is what it is, and I'm fine with it. I'm just grateful to still have the opportunity to continue growing it.
Well, just a couple of other things that I do want to ask you before we wrap this up. I don't want to take up too much of your time. But you know, it's been very long and well documented about the comparisons, of course, between Exhorder and Pantera. But you've noted many times you're friends and there's no jealousy, nothing like that, blah, blah, blah. But the one thing I did see you mention at one point that I did want to ask you about was there was a quote from you where you said something along the lines of, you know, Pantera, the guys in Pantera worked harder than Exhorder did. And I guess I was just curious exactly what you meant by that.
Touring, even before Pantera got signed to Atco and did Cowboys from Hell, they had their own label called Metal Magic. And if you go back, you know, 2 or 3 albums before Phil even joined the band, they were out playing and doing well for themselves, and they would go on tour. So they were an independent act on their own label, doing it DIY style, but they still went out and beat the road down. And we did a little bit of that, but not at that level, not even close. So now, granted, they, you know, once they got on the major label, things changed dramatically for them on a daily basis, and they had a lot better resources than we did. And, you know, that's part of the game too. You know, I mean, it could have been us at some point had things worked out differently for us, but we made a lot of mistakes. Our behavior wasn't the greatest. And we were also known as that band that you never know if they're going to show up and destroy the place or end up fighting on stage. You know, that's just, and part of that was alluring, because it's kind of like, you know, the dumpster fire train wreck that, you know, people want to see. What are they going to do next? But it's tough for a label to market that. And then at some point, you know, we got kicked off of a tour because of our behavior. And, you know, at some point the record labels go, all right, we're tired of this, because now everyone's losing money over this. And we're the ones left, you know, holding the bag on that. And you have to stand up and be accountable at some point and go, it was our fault. And that's all I've ever said is, yeah, we made mistakes. And, you know, I don't look at any other bands that have succeeded in what they're doing, especially if they're a band that was similar to us in some kind of way. I never look at them and go, that should have been us. Like, well, no, it shouldn't have been us, because we fucked up.
Well, to that point, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but in the All Music review of Slaughter in the Vatican, they say that naming your record Slaughter in the Vatican probably doesn't do a whole lot to help your case. Do you think that there's any truth in that? Do you think that the name stunted the band's growth at all, or not really?
Back then, probably to a degree, and there's several reasons. One, like today, that's tame by comparison to some of the stuff that gets 100%. Said and done now. It's like child's play. Yeah. But back then, first of all, you just did not attack the Pope. The Pope, we didn't. You see the album cover for Slaughter in the Vatican, and if you see the demo cover, it's very different. We wanted to use the demo cover for our album cover, which was literally our logo, a rope hanging from our logo with not just a pope, but John Paul II, who was pope at the time, who was probably the most beloved pope of all time, who is now Saint John Paul II, and the Vatican burning in the background, children and women crying at his feet. And Roadrunner was like, not a chance. You are not putting that on the album cover. It's too much. So then we had to devise a way to circumvent that problem. And, you know, on the album cover, you just see the back of the Pope's head. So it's just any Pope. It's not the Pope. Kmart refused to carry it at the time, which was frustrating to me because I remember being in Kmart and seeing an album by a band called Christian Death, just kind of like if I remember correctly, it was kind of like a goth band.
Yeah.
Cool band for sure. A lot different than us, but Christian Death. And it looked, you know, it was a very extreme album cover. And I think there was a depiction of Christ with his arms out like this with hypodermic needles, like dozens of hypodermic needles in his arms. And I'm like, Kmart won't allow us to put Slaughter in the Vatican, but they'll allow this. So you can attack Christ all you want.
Just not the Pope.
But you better leave the Pope alone. I mean, to me, that's like, get out of here.
What do
so,
you...
yeah, Slaughter in the Vatican hurt back then. Today, it's child's play.
What do you think of that band Ghost, I guess, speaking of popes real quick?
I think they're a really amazing band. I've heard a lot of their stuff. It hasn't really like clicked with me as a fan per se, but I hear why a lot of people love it. And as a choral singer myself with a chorally trained, you know, I sang in the high school chorus for 2 years and I performed Beethoven's Ninth with the New Orleans Symphony when I was in my late teens. So I admire everything that they do very much. And I think the theatrics are great. I haven't connected with it, and maybe I just haven't spent enough time with it. I don't knock it, but you know, I think I see why it's successful, no doubt.
Well, I think that band is also proof that the times have really changed because much like the Slaughter in the Vatican back in the day, I mean, I don't think a band like Ghost would be anywhere as huge and mainstream back then as they are now. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I think part of that is just younger generations are a lot more desensitized to anything with shock value. And I also think that you've got the Roman Catholic Church simply does not have the stranglehold and power over the world that it used to have.
Sure.
And if they don't change you start seeing them start to be a lot more lenient about things. It's like, I know why y'all are being lenient about things. It's because business is bad and you need to try and reel your people back in. You know, my generation, and I'm Generation X, grew up, and I think we were the first ones to really give this to the church. And, you know, some of us stayed with it and some of us just said enough, but I actually sent my children to Catholic school, just like I went to Catholic school, simply because, and mostly because where I'm from, the public school system's really not as good as it should be. And that's unfortunate. It's not fair to people who have no other option, but I had another option. So we sent our kids to Catholic school. And then I said, well, let me at least let them decide for themselves about the faith part and the religion part, and let them learn just the way I'd learned, and then they can make their own choice. And guess what? All three of my youngest children that went into the Catholic school system all walked away like this. So
while they were in school,
but at least it was, well, I mean, they just grew up and said, I'm done with it. I've heard enough.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm grateful that it happened that way, because I never did force any of my likes and interests on them. I never did force my music, especially I never even introduced them to Exhorder until they were mid-late teens, because to me, it just wasn't appropriate stuff for a child to listen to. And that's just who I am as a parent. But they've, you know, either come to learn to love it or at least appreciate it for what it is. and amongst other things, they think for themselves. We were always a household that taught our children to think for themselves and stand up for themselves and not to take anybody's bullshit.
When they were in school, was there any like awareness from the faculty of who you were and Slaughter in the Vatican and all of that?
I don't know how I made it through Catholic high school without getting kicked out. I'm not kidding you. Like the last 2 years I was in high school, it was the summer after my sophomore year I joined. So in Catholic school for junior and senior year with Slaughter in the Vatican there. It's like, I don't know how I flew stealth under the radar for that. But I did. And I mean, I was never a troublemaker anyway. So I just, kept my head down and I kept my nose out of trouble. But when they went back around, I was worried about that. I was, but it was never a problem. In fact, one of the religion teachers of my kids, I was dropping them off one day and I had a tank top on and she saw my tattoo and she's like, Exhorder, cool. And she just thought I was a fan. And then eventually I got to talk to her with parent teacher conferences and she was just like, oh, you're like the dude. And I'm like, yeah. And it's just ironic. I think that she was the religion teacher and grew up a fan of the band,
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. That is. Well, like we mentioned earlier, coming up on 40 years of the band, is there any plans to celebrate an anniversary?
Nah.
No.
We're really trying more to focus on the now and the future than we are. I mean, we're grateful for the back catalog and we honor it still, of course. But it's about growth at this point, and you can hang around in a comfort zone and in a safe area, or you can try to have some growth and take chances and expand. And we're all very creative people with a lot left to do and a lot left to say. So we're moving forward. We're going to keep bringing new music, but we will always keep the back catalog in there as well.
And then outside of the band, you've got a couple of other projects as well, with Trouble and Alabama Thunder Pussy. What's going on with those?
New album is in the process of being recorded with Trouble. We started and then had some technical issues, I think, with the recording console of our sound guy. So I think he's had to order some replacements, and they're coming from overseas, and that's been a delay. And then we started recording, and I think the guys got partway through it and then said, let's start this over again. So we're really kind of starting again from scratch. But we're not in a hurry because the last album came out 11 years ago. So at this point, why rush things? Let's just make it the best that we can make it. And so that's the mindset right now is let's make the best Trouble record we can. And as far as Alabama Thunder Pussy goes, we just recently did some touring last year. Hadn't done a whole lot of anything since 2007. So that was fun. I think maybe down the line, there may be something more coming from that band. But as of right now, I'm like so busy with this new Exhorder album and then the Trouble album on the way that I just don't know that I have much time for another national act, international project, recording act. When it comes time for it and makes sense, I'm happy to do it. I love the guys and we had a really good time on tour. But I mean, I've got a solo album that I started writing that's been on the shelf for a few years now that I started writing kind of around the same time we started writing Defectum Omnium. But it just doesn't make sense for me to start pouring a lot of time into that right now. I don't have the time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that solo record. When I mean, so probably not even in 2024. Is that going to come out?
Definitely not in 2024.
Well, I guess while we wait, you can check out the new Exhorder album, Defectum Omnium, which is out now. The upcoming U.S. dates with Vio-lence, a number of European dates in May. And I know you said his name earlier, but who's filling in for Pat on those European shows?
Valdemar Sarikta. He was the guitarist for Grip Inc. Jason also played in Grip Inc. with Dave Lombardo.
Oh yeah, that's
Slayer.
right. Yeah.
And they had great success in the 90s. Valdemar's played in lots of different bands. He's also a well-known producer. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, he produced a lot of bands. Lacuna Coil, basically anybody that was ever on Century Media Records. He was kind of like the in-house producer for Century Media Records. Very talented guy. He's a talented artist, great guitar player, and dear friend of ours.
Well, make sure you check out the new record. You can get all the dates at exhorder.com. Kyle, thanks so much for coming on, man. Really appreciate your time doing this.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure and an honor.